Hello and welcome back to Family Round the Table. You can see that we're a small bit depleted. As many of you know, we are doing some fostering, so we have a little person living with us just now. So sometimes it just doesn't work with bedtime routines and things like that. So Lydia has drawn the short straw, or maybe the long one, I'm not sure which one, but she's got to stay with the baby today. And so there's just three of us, and we've got two oldies and one kind of oldie too. So three oldies now, because yesterday, Bethany, what happened to you?
I turned 21.
She turned 21, so it's three adults at the table. And we're going to start by reading about, you know that last time I wasn't here for some of the reasons for what Lydia is doing today. We've got Mark chapter 6 and they only did half of it. So I told them off because I said, for goodness sake, I'll leave you for 1 week and there's not even any real work done. But however, we're back for the second half, just kidding. And we're going to start verse 30, please.
The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. When it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish.
Then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by fifties. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, where he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land.
And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the 4th watch of the night he came to them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. When they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored to the shore. And when they got out of the boat, the people immediately recognized him and ran about the whole region and began to bring the sick people on their beds to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he came, in villages, cities, or countryside, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and implored him that he might touch even the fringe of his garment. And as many as touched it were made well. So, as we said, we've only done the half last week, so we're doing the other half. And obviously, the chapters and the verses, they're put in afterwards. So, these stories, we don't have to break them up in the way that they're broken up. We could read them however.
And it'd be really interesting one day to find out exactly when things happened. And they're, like this is someone else's recount of it later on as well. So, when I try to imagine what happened this past week, and I try and tell you, I can have it mixed up a little bit in days, and and stories come out tumbling upon themselves as well.
Yeah, so just before this, we'd had the sort of flashback scene, as we were calling it, you know, and but before that, Jesus had sent out the 12 apostles. So then it says the apostles returned to Jesus. So this isn't just, you know, they went out and got something to eat and came back. They'd been out and done a lot of things, and so they'd come back and
They were needing rest now, weren't
yeah, they told him all they had done and taught.
I love that. I love that he trusted them to go, because I'm sure they made a pig's ear of it in many ways, like by comparison to him being there. I love that they come back and he sees that they've worked really hard, so now what they need is rest. He loves to put people to work, but he also makes sure that we have enough to sustain that.
Yeah, and so I have this whole colour system in
Oh,
highlighting, and my dark green I sort of put for either commands Jesus gives to us or
Okay.
just things I want to work on. And actually I decided to highlight this in dark green because I feel like you can take it and you can definitely run with it way too much
Yeah.
and say, well, you know, we're meant to rest. But you can also run the opposite way and work too hard. And so I think it's a really good thing to learn the balance of.
Yeah, I saw something else, you know that saying that says you can't pour from an empty cup? And that's so true, but they were saying actually it's not true, that you can still pour from an empty cup, like from your life, you can still give out, but it just has a direct impact on you.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we all work on that, coming aside to rest.
Yes.
Probably what you're giving is not as worthwhile.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely.
We were talking about that in our ministers' meeting earlier in the week as I met up with some of the folks from around Inverness and Nairn and that online. We're talking about the need, particularly in this time of so-called lockdown, that we still need to take that time out. And as much as that has maybe been a little bit more difficult, especially arranging pulpit supply and the like, we recognise the need is still there. I know I appreciated the opportunity to do something a little bit different last week as we had a visiting preacher.
Yeah. We were actually talking about this kind of recently in, you know, when you have planned to sort of have a day off and then sometimes it doesn't quite go how it planned and you almost have to make the decision, am I going to do this ministry that is really important and is really needed, or am I going to take my day? And we were trying to discuss, you know, what would Jesus do in this situation? And as I kind of go spoiler alert, so I'm going to head on, but we will come back. I'm very sorry, I'm doing a mum. So here he says, you know, go to a desolate place, rest, yes, this is a good idea. And then he sees people and goes, oh, well, you know, I have compassion on them. And that's what he does have compassion. But then later on you find he went up onto the mountain to pray. So he did get that time, but he didn't turn away people when they needed him.
It's kind of a tricky balance, isn't it? And it's that whole thing of, because then in a little while he actually sends them away. So he knew there was a time to bring them in whenever they were there, and then there's a time to say, okay, that's it now, off you go, because they'd have stayed forever listening to him, I'm sure. And he had to then, and that's the balance that Jesus had that was perfect, that we don't often have. And there's another bit in the Bible, I talked about this before, I think, where Jesus says, I must be about my Father's business, when they say, let's eat. And he's like, you know, I don't need to eat. And it's not that he didn't need to eat, he just was so busy with what he was doing right there. He was like, I will get a moment after. And I think that's, you know, God is a good master. He will not push us to death. If we're getting overworked, it's because we're choosing to do that. That's not God's way. And if we then say, okay, well look, this is here and I need to do this now, then go on, but then take your time off after.
Yeah, I think, you know, as we were talking in our meeting earlier in the week, life in ministry is unpredictable, the very nature of it. You know, there could be a funeral that you can't plan months in advance for. There's lots of things that will happen that are unexpected and almost unexpectable. But it's a matter of managing your schedule so that you can be effective and useful with the time you have, and we can all be very busy, but not being unrealistic and thinking, okay, I can do that today, not realizing that you know, in between that we ought to be doing, you know, 3 different things.
Shots fired here. Shots are fired.
And there might come a visitor to the door, and recognizing that we need to almost plan for rest time, but at the same time allow time within our schedule for the unexpected.
Tales of the unexpected.
So then it's just sort of explaining why they needed that time to go away, for they were coming and going and they had no leisure even to eat.
Lots of people talk about being busy, don't they?
Yeah,
You know,
everyone
I
does.
can't do that because things have been so busy recently, or I'm so tired or exhausted that
We can all eat.
generally we normally find time for that.
Yeah. We were so busy whenever we just come home from something and we're heading out to something and we had to do sit down and do this and it was like, well, do we do this or do we eat? And I'm like, well, I have to eat.
Yeah.
So I'll not be able to think if we don't eat.
And yet still there are times where, you know, we're eating and we have people, like maybe before COVID more, we would have had people coming in and we'd be like, oh, we're just having lunch, but come on in anyways. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes that does overlap.
Yeah. But we always say it's not your food until it's in your mouth.
Yeah.
It might get all taken back and redistributed around the people that have popped in.
Yeah, I do think it's important to realise that these people had such a heart for ministry that they gave up their time to eat to be able to do ministry. And what does that teach us when we're coming into maybe church every week or onto the Zoom call and saying, oh, I've just had so much on, I just didn't have time for anything.
Yeah.
Like, we probably do have time, even though none of us want to admit it.
It's a difficult, isn't it? A difficult balance,
Yeah.
and everyone's busier than the next person, really.
So yeah, so they went into a boat to a desolate place by themselves.
There's a lot of mention of this desolate place, isn't there? They
Yeah.
really were trying to get away from it.
Yeah,
And yet people burned them.
I think we can all, like we said that this week, didn't we? We can always find someone to talk to wherever we go.
Especially Mum.
Yeah, but do you know what I mean? So you try and find the desolation, and it doesn't really work. Like, but you know, I like people to talk to, so don't not talk to me.
But it says, you know, people saw them going and they recognised them, but it wasn't just like they recognised them and walked up to him. They ran there on foot from all the towns. So these people were so desperate to see Jesus.
It's a multitude as well, doesn't it seem like it's many saw them, a
You know, we went
multitude.
ashore and saw a great crowd.
I think often we get the impression that if they're going to get in the boat on one side of the Sea of Galilee, they obviously must be going to the other side, which would be a sort of half-hour drive, let alone never mind walk. But very often they just use boat as means of transport to get from, you know, sort of 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Maybe they did have a wee bit of time in the boat as well. So like, maybe there's that. I think we've said this before. Like when the knowledge is that you're having a bit of time off, you can actually cope with way more when something happens. Do you know what I mean? If you were kind of going from having this and suddenly the multitude, it would have been awful. But actually, they had that bit of time in the boat, that chatting, telling Jesus what had happened. That actually their hearts were quite filled, perhaps.
I think it's funny how our preconceived ideas can make us think that we know the story and we kind of forget we weren't actually there.
Yeah.
You know, so like you say, we often assume because they're getting into a boat, they must be going to the other side. This was one of my first assignments in Bible college, and we had to do, I think it was actually this story here, we had to do a timeline of when we think everything happened and an exact report doing all the books and everything. I was like, oh, that's easy. And then I started looking into it and I realised they went, well, this record says they went to here and this record says they go to there, and they probably did go to both of them, but which one did they go to first? And the Bible has so much information for us to learn from, and we kind of have to have an open mind.
Absolutely, and everyone has a different perspective of it, don't they, as they write it down, as we've said already. Well, it's Matthew 28, isn't it? Is this where this story is? No. Matthew 14.
So.
Matthew 14, verse 28. I didn't read it properly.
Some of the locations are unconfirmed, aren't they? So where the Sermon on the Mount was given and where the 5,000 were fed. There's a few locations suggested as being plausible, but it's not 100% positive.
Yeah, it's verse 13, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's because later on I looked at it because where Peter walks in the water, it's in this part, isn't it? In verse 28.
Yeah. So he went ashore and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. What a picture.
Yeah, it's so dangerous, sheep without a shepherd, isn't it? Like, you know, they wouldn't be able to fend for themselves. You know, often, especially living on Skye, you see sheep everywhere, like all over the place, and it would seem like they had nothing and no one to look after them, but there was always someone, and then there would like be a time where everyone who co-opted had the sheep would take them together and they'd get their fleeces done and all that kind of thing. There was always that care and concern, and you know, if sheep can get in such danger by themselves.
Yeah.
I suppose you could get the brave sheep thinking, okay, I can lead the rest of these sheep and leading them astray, leading them into more problems.
Mm.
So he began to teach them many things, and when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late.
Mm.
Send them away."
There are no shops here, Lord.
Yeah.
Like,
And
what are we going to do?
That seems perfectly logical, doesn't it? And I love
Yeah.
how often in the Bible the disciples are perfectly logical, and
Mhm.
Jesus just turns to them and goes, "No,
Yeah.
what are you doing?"
I think like, Jesus saw the need and wanted to meet the need. They saw the need and wanted to get rid of the need. So that can be, and that's often again what happens in church, isn't it? We we don't want the need. We don't want to have to deal with it. We don't, we were quite happy in our little bubble of what's happening, and actually there's a need, such a need in all of our areas and towns and families,
Yeah.
and we need to meet that need like Jesus did.
And so he answers, "Give them something to eat." I love their response. "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread?"
Yeah, wasn't that like a year's wages worth or something? Like, do you know what
A
we spend
denarii
that?
is a day's wages, it says here.
Ah, okay.
So,
So, yeah,
yeah,
200 days worth, is it?
yeah,
But then I
Which
suppose you
is-
wouldn't work in the,
almost a year.
yeah, a year's worth, yeah. And it's like, for them it's, it's impossible, but it's also wasteful. They were like, why would we do that? There must be better use for the money than that.
Yeah.
Amazing that there was a whole day's teaching basically that we're not told anything about.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
and he did teach them, he taught them many things.
Also, that so many people came to see him with no
Yeah.
food.
Yeah, I know.
Like, that would not be you. You would have been there. "It's okay, Jesus. Actually, do you know what? I have 5,000 people worth of stuff in bag."
Can I just say, it wasn't it. I'm finding it's quite hard on me today. That they didn't have in their heads anything that Jesus was going to do a miracle. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, having been with him for this time and seen what he
Yeah.
could do, there wasn't one part of, "Don't worry, Jesus got this covered." Like, do you remember that wedding we went to and there was no wine? They're not.
I
didn't
suppose
have
the
that.
thing is that these are probably not that close together.
Yeah.
Do you know, like,
Yeah.
while his time in ministry was short, it was, what, 3 years or something?
Yeah.
So you think about these miracles, they were probably often enough.
Yeah.
But these big miracles that are recorded, like the water turning into wine, was probably a while ago, and so they're now like, well, what do we do now?
Yeah.
How quick are we?
Yeah.
Yes.
We've seen
Forget
God
so
provide for
often,
us in amazing ways,
Yeah.
and then we get to a point and the bank is empty and
Yeah.
we've got a bill and well, what are we going to do now? We start to
And it so often is that the miracle comes right when we need it. It's not right before we need it.
Mhm.
It's not like, here you go, here's your little cushion. It's, feel like you're falling first and then I'll come.
Yeah. I love as well, he says to them, "How many loaves do you have? Like, use what you have.
Mm-hmm.
Don't bother asking for something that you've already got. Use that bit first."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so true of us as well, isn't it? Like, we have. Is it Moses at the time when it says, "What do you have in your hand?" What's that one?
God said to Moses.
God said to Moses, "What do you have in your hand?" And use that.
Uh-huh.
And like, I love that. Like, that for me is
Yeah, he had his stick.
in a
Yeah.
stick, yeah.
Jesus sent him out last week with a stick, didn't he?
Oh,
Yeah. Something I find funny, I really like it, but I don't really know why I like it, is that he mentions it's green grass.
Yeah.
I
Just
know,
so you know.
I know. I love it.
They sat down in groups on the green grass.
Yeah, and I love, seemingly the Greek word is the same as the Greek word for rows of vegetables.
Oh, they sat down on the vegetables.
No,
They could have eaten that.
no, like they sat in rows like vegetables.
Oh.
Right? So like the 50 and 100, it's the same grouping as you'd have. You'd never have your radishes and your tomatoes together, for instance. You would have, it would be very orderly, and God
okay.
is orderly.
Sat in ranks, it says here.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, really? Oh, which? Oh,
Sat
what?
on the radishes.
English.
Oh, okay.
Mm.
Right. Yeah, so then he took the loaves and he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. I love that bit.
And that's like seemingly not the normal. Like, so
Oh,
to
really?
pray in that way, you would look down. So the only thing that
Oh.
he did really differently was that he looked up to heaven. And he didn't bless the bread, he blessed God for
Mhm.
giving them the bread.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Like, like they'd all looked down, that was their prayer normal. whereas Jesus looked up to heaven.
I love the fact that, you know, so as Christians, we would typically pray before a meal. And some people would say, you know, why? And you've got the obvious answer of, well, you know, God's provided it for us, we're thankful to Him. But now, right here is a literal demonstration of it. You know, He was going to feed all these people, and what did He do first? He prayed.
Yeah. It's a very simple fare, isn't it? It's nothing too... You know, we've not even talked about the wee boy that had the lunch, Dickory, as well. She's not mentioned in this one, is he? And that's again another great Sunday school one, isn't it?
You would have been that mum. Yep. I would have been Nathaniel. Nathaniel would have been off with a little box. And Jesus, he would have come up to Jesus and opened up his box.
Ever off with a picnic, I'm like, don't share it. No, I won't, I'll say share it. But yeah, it's I love that you know, it's simple, but it was more than enough because Jesus is extravagant, because in that way they have to pick up the 12 baskets at the end.
Yeah.
And they've all eaten and they're all satisfied. You know, there's nothing wasted. Yeah. He picks that up, he's going to use the rest. Directly, and that's God's economy, isn't it? It's always, like, He is extravagant, His love is extravagant, His giving is extravagant, His, you know, His family, His all that. But actually, what it isn't often is the way that He provides for our needs. Directly, it can often be through something quite unspectacular, like a little boy with his picnic, or a widow with a mite, or you know, it can be a lady with a box of oil that puts it over his feet. It's often quite unspectacular that then becomes something quite spectacular. Because that little boy, although not mentioned here, we all know about him and his loaves and fishes.
I actually really love the fact that it doesn't tell us exactly how it happened.
Yeah.
Do you know, there is, so it says that he broke it up.
I reckon.
Yeah, but we don't know whether he broke off the bread and the bread would just appear again. We don't know whether it multiplied. We don't know whether, you know, he just kept reaching down and there was another bit of bread.
Yeah.
So we cannot become, you know, religious. We can't say, oh, well, you know, if we do this, then this will happen. All we know is that we have to depend on God, and that's all you
There's
can
a
take.
really lovely story about Corrie ten Boom, isn't there, when she was in the camp, the concentration camp. Yeah. And she had like a little bottle of vitamins. Do you remember this story? And the nurse had given it to her, had sort of like sneaked it to her, and she had it, you know, hanging down here, and she would give everybody within her area a little drop of this vitamin thing, you know, because they were getting such terrible nutrients and were getting malnourished and stuff like that. And like that bottle never ran out.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's a little bit, for me, like that story is a little bit like this, like with Jesus and the bread. It just never stopped coming, and you can't really explain it because of course a bottle should run dry, of course a loaf should stop, but it's just unexplainable. Like you said, we can't work it out, we can't muster it up, and we can't make it happen.
So the only thing we can do is rely on God.
Yeah.
And I think that's really beautiful.
And if there was anyone here hungry, it was their own fault. They didn't take from the basket.
Yeah.
And that sometimes that's it again, you know, we come to Jesus and we don't take for ourselves. We take, well, that's a really good word for that person, or you know, God's great to that person, but actually we need to take for ourselves from the basket and take it into our hearts.
Yeah, I love that they all ate and were satisfied. You know, this story is such a well-known story, isn't it? That you know, all these phrases, they ate and were satisfied, he looked up to heaven, he prayed, it sort of just becomes, well, yeah, that's what happened. But when you really look at it and you think about it more, they all ate and were satisfied.
It wasn't that they were all saved from starvation.
No.
Just enough to get back home.
And again, that's the thing, isn't it? It could have been just a little lunch, it could have been just a wee bit, but it was to complete fruition of like their appetites. They were absolutely happy.
Yeah. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. I love how now you're like getting the number in this record. Just so you know, like this is a pretty cool story, yes, but just
Good job you got it at the start, like, you know, like, good job you've done that whole passage part and say Jesus feeds the 5,000.
And we're not told what happened to the leftovers, but it is a very coinencidental number for the number of disciples, isn't it?
That's right. That's tomorrow's lunch. Yeah. The next verse has the Mark's favourite word.
I was right about to say it, and
go
now
on.
we have Mark's favourite word immediately.
Yeah. He made his disciples get into the boat. He's like, okay, now it's time. You've worked enough now.
Yeah. And while he dismissed the crowd, that's what you were saying earlier. So, you know, like at this point he realised, yeah, okay, I've had compassion on them, I've taught them, I've fed them, I've done everything I can for them. Now it's time for them to go and we need our time.
Yeah.
And
Jesus is exhausted too, I think. Do you like me? Like he is, you know, happy to see them go, and instead of that exhaustion making him go straight to sleep, it makes him go straight to prayer.
yeah, I love that. I love that, you know, sometimes I feel like when you're in a desperate situation, you turn to prayer because it's all you can do. But sometimes when you're not that quite desperate enough, you just feel lazy and you want to go to sleep.
Like he could, we've said this before in other parts as well, where he could just lay down and went, that was an amazing day, you know, thank you Father, you've done fantastic work. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, that's what he could have done, because he'd seen great things happen that day, he'd seen God moving again, but actually he's realising, you know what, I could easily then be so depleted that I need to build up for the next battle.
He went
the
and
next miracle.
purposely prayed. And I think that is something that you don't often find in our generation. I think that is something that is a skill that is learned, and that you often find in elderly people. Do you know, because they have built it up, and I so admire those people that are just, they take those times to pray, and it's something I would like to
And
be
the
doing.
disciples said that, like, teach us to pray. Do you know what I mean? It is about, it's about a scholar learning from the master. Do you know what I mean? And he didn't do well, fell asleep. But, you know, these things happen. I love this bit. Where are we at, Bethany?
We're about to do verse 47.
Oh, not that bit.
So we'll skim. We'll go.
Oh, that's okay. I like this one.
So when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land.
The next bit.
I wonder how he got rid of the crowd or stopped them from following him. He dismissed them.
Yeah.
I wonder what that really means.
Maybe it was a time where it was just like, do you know what? It's time to go home. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was, you know, it had been a great day, and they were able to go home. But I like this
He
bit.
saw that they were
I
making headway painfully.
I love that, and he saw.
Yeah.
I love that. Like, they're in trouble, and they don't know, but he sees them. Oh, I think that was good.
Yeah, that's cool. The wind was against them, and about the fourth watch of the night.
About 3 o'clock in the morning.
Between
Sorry,
3
you're gonna-
a.m. and 6 a.m.
Oh.
My footnote says that doesn't
No,
mean that
I'll
it's
go with your footnote.
100%. Well, that's
You're not
so
in
it
your
could be 3 o'clock in the morning because it's between 3 and 6.
I just read that.
Yeah.
It's not that. It's not that I say. With the Luke
She was there.
in the 4th of the night. I'm going to say that from now on.
I love that it is though that we get those times and things. Some things are so specific and some things are so vague. It's kind of funny.
I think this is hilarious, isn't it?
He came to them walking on the sea. Now
He meant to pass by them.
I know. I'm guessing I'm pretty sure he only did this like the once, right? So this record is a shorter record than other places, right? Or is this a different time than when
And
Peter
no, this is the same time, I think. This is when Matthew 14, and like it said, I read that, like, you know, Peter's supposed to be the kind of what's what I'm looking for, the person that Mark speaks to, all the, I can't remember what the word is I'm looking for, anyway, like someone, the source, the source of this book. So either he was humiliated and was like, I don't want to bring that in there, or he was like, do you know what? I walked in the water and I don't want to be exalted in any way. This was the Lord.
Yeah.
So I don't know why it's not in there, but if Peter is the main source for this book, then he certainly leaves it out.
Yeah. And this book is meant for Gentiles, right? So they wouldn't really have had an appreciation of Jesus. So maybe hearing somebody else walk on the water, they would have been like, somebody else walked then. But now Mark is saying, you know, Jesus walked on the water, and they were all terrified.
And why did he want to pass them by? I know. But maybe more, I didn't mean to pass it. Maybe he meant to just speak to them on his way past. I'm not sure. Don't know what.
He would have passed them by if they hadn't called for him to stop. I think he was walking in such a way that he was ready to be called upon.
Yeah.
But just like when he was going to Emmaus, he was ready to keep going.
Yeah. So it's
But
like
also
prayer
maybe called
sometimes.
aside.
You can kind of, like, that's why we pray, is because Jesus can do something, but doesn't always choose to. But if we pray to him, he may.
Yeah.
He perhaps would love to, if only we would take that
pray.
time
Yeah. Well, that's nice.
to
Yeah.
call on him.
I love that they thought it was a ghost. And they cried out. They see their saviour, who's performed so many miracles, and he's doing this thing which, yes, admittedly is rather odd, walking on the ocean or the sea or whatever, but
Yeah. None of it's normal though, right?
Exactly.
5,000 people fed, and then like
And so
a man walking on water.
their first
people
thought is it's a
healed.
ghost.
Yeah.
Why is their first thought it's a ghost
Yeah.
and not, oh my goodness, he walks on water too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They'd been really busy, they hadn't had time to eat. Now
Yeah.
they're crossing the water at 3 a.m.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's not a normal 9 to 5 day, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot in this little bit that's quite tricky to understand, I feel,
Mhm.
but you know, it's one of those. I think it is tricky to understand anyway, even if you got all the details.
Yeah. But it is just the pattern again of they're terrified and he says, take heart, it's I, do not be afraid. You know, I'm here,
Mm-hmm.
so there's no need for you to be afraid. There's danger all around you, the waves are horrible and
Yeah.
you even think I'm a ghost. But I'm here, so you don't need to be afraid.
Yeah, and then like when the waves stop, then they're utterly
Mhm.
astounded.
Mm-hmm. They did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened.
Yeah.
I think John picks up on that more, doesn't he? Because they start talking about leaven and
Oh,
and
yeah.
there's a whole lesson brought out of
Mm.
that. And Jesus rebukes them. You're still thinking about the bread you being used to feed the multitude.
Yeah. Hmm.
So then, when they had crossed over, they came to land at.
Nazareth.
That's it. Supposedly.
Mm-hmm.
And moored to the shore. I saw that and went, oh dear, when I was reading.
It's about halfway up the left-hand side of the Sea of Galilee.
Where's your map?
I know. I just referenced it before I came
I
down.
feel sad.
And when they got out of the boat, the people immediately recognised him and ran about the whole of the region. It's sort of a pattern, isn't it?
Yeah. I love it though. I love the fact that they believe in him so much. Like you know, I know that it. You know, when we get to Crucifixion Day, where are all these bodies? But
Yeah.
you know, like at this point, they're like, "Have you got anyone sick? Quick, come! The healer's coming to look for me." And whenever he came, like every time he went through anything, a village, a city, countryside, the sick were being dragged out to
Yeah.
sleep
He
in
might touch
marketplaces.
even the fringe of his garment. I think that probably
Yeah.
takes us back to the woman, isn't it? If I can
Mm.
only touch the hem of his garment.
Yeah, and as many as touched it were made well as well.
Yeah.
Definitely, like I think I remember my dad saying about the King James version that it said whole, didn't it? That well and whole, and it was like an entirety rather than just that they were up and walking, or that they were seeing, or that they were on back to full health. It was actually that he again dealt with their whole man.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you know, when the man was lowered through the roof of the house, he first said, your sins are forgiven, and that was really a priority for Jesus. And in these short accounts, they obviously can't give word for word exactly
Yeah.
what happened, because Mark zooms through it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
When he says that they were made well, he isn't saying he just
Yeah.
healed them. He's
Yeah.
saying he gave them another chance at life. He gave them everything they would have needed, you know, and Jesus didn't just care about our physical state.
Absolutely. It's great.
Yeah.
So there we are, end of chapter 6, Bethany.
Yes! Thank you for joining us for the end of chapter 6. We will be moving on to chapter 7 next time.
Spoiler.
So please join us for that. If you have any comments, put them down below. We like it when people join in. We sometimes get phone calls now with comments. Whew. But yes, it is nice to know that this is good for other people as well, because we really enjoy it. It's really good for us to
Absolutely,
go
yeah.
through things.
Yeah.
So
It really is.
thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.